Welcome to High Notes, conversations on the art and business of voice. High Notes. Make sure you never miss a video on our channel by pressing that subscribe button, and if you like this episode, please do give it a like and leave us a comment below. Now, let's meet this month's guest. In this episode, we talk to artist, actor and writer Lorien Haynes. Lorian's new play, Shakespeare's Women, was performed at the Globe Theatre earlier this year, supported by Brava, with a stellar cast, raising funds for the charity Refuge. We'll hear more about how the play came about and explore Lorian's journey from shy teenager to accomplished creative practitioner. Find out more about Lorian's work and her new play, Shakespeare's Women, in the link in the description below. So today we're going to be talking to artist, actor and writer Lorien Haynes. Brava recently supported the premiere of her new play, incredible production at Shakespeare's Globe last month, all in aid of Refuge. So thank you for joining us today, Lorien.
Pleasure.
So lovely to sit down with you with a cup of tea today. I'd like to start at the beginning, if I may, just to find out a little bit about you. And I just want to know how you originally became a professional artist. What drew you to the field of acting and theatre?
Oh, ironically, shyness. I was really, really shy and withdrawn as an early teenager and really kind of hardly could speak. My head was in books and I just had a really bad time early secondary school. And I wandered into a rehearsal in the assembly room at my school and kind of got a bit fascinated by the fact they were doing this terrible melodrama production of Murder in the Red Barn or something. But I just kind of was watching it thinking, oh no, I'm supposed to be here. This is where I'm supposed to be. And it was. So this very withdrawn person found a space where I felt I could function, and it was on stage with theatre. And ever since then, I mean, I was about 13 then, I've always wanted to be in plays, working, acting. And then that obviously escalated. And I did drama and screenwriting for my BA and then my master's, and started writing alongside performing. And then when I graduated, I did a lot of voice work, actually, a lot of voiceover work, as well as acting, and have kind of always had this balance. Just acting on and of itself, I found really hard because the periods out of work would drive me bananas. And you feel very disempowered often as an actor because, I could write 150 letters a week and couldn't get seen. And I was working in Oasis and in pubs and God knows, like everybody else does. And I just thought, if I don't find something else that I love as much as acting, I'm going to go barking mad. And so that was when I really started writing at the same time. So it's always been that kind of balance of writing material and performing, which I would advise any young actor to do. And my daughter's going into the business, and I've said to her, I know you love acting, you're a great actress, but you have to find something that you love, whether it's directing or photography or playing the violin or whatever it is that you love, that you can do instead of feeling that awful redundant, I'm out of work feeling, which I don't think is sustainable really for so many people.
I think you're really right there. And actually, that's something where voice acting can plug a bit of a gap as well, because if you get into the commercial and corporate world, then you can earn some decent money with that. And it can sit beautifully alongside your role as a stage or TV actor. How did you find the experience of being at university? How was that for you?
Well, I was at the University of East Anglia, and the course was a kind of practical as well as academic. I mean, it was quite heftily academic, like all those courses were at that point in history, which is quite a long time ago. But every term we did a production. I was kind of quite a serious student, really. I mean, my contemporaries may say otherwise, but what I remember was I'd had a bit of a rough teenage period, and I was predicted to do really well in my A-levels, and I hadn't done as well as was expected. So when I started to find my space academically and enjoy academics, they said quite early on, if you work really hard, you could get a first. And I was so shocked by this that I thought, well, I'm now determined to give myself a chance. And, I thought I want a first class degree, and I sort of worked my ass off and got one, and sort of felt proud that I'd overcome not academic obstacles as much as personal obstacles to sort of be able to focus like that. And at the same time, I loved the productions that we did. And I'm also completely obsessed with film. I mean, I write films, I write TV now, and doing a film degree as well at the same time. It was always loved watching films and trying to understand cinema. And so it was, I really enjoyed that experience. And then I went back to do a master's in creative writing. So that's how much I enjoyed the experience.
Right. And you did that East Anglia, the creative writing masters.
I did.
Yeah, wonderful place to do that for sure. So you went on to move to America. How long after that was that after your degree? And what was that experience like?
Well, America was just a big accident. It wasn't planned. My daughter was 5 and I'd split up from her dad, and we'd been together for 8 years. And every year he'd gone to America to do pilot season. And every year he'd got incredibly close to like that big job. But in the 8 years that we were together, he didn't get it. And the year we split up, ironically, he got a really great pilot, and it went series. And our daughter was so distressed at the prospect of not seeing her dad that she stopped sleeping. He's always been a brilliant hands-on dad, even though we've been separate. And I just ended up sort of saying to him, she's not sleeping. What do we do about this? And he said, why don't you come out here for a short time, and his now wife and I would kind of co-parent, and Lilac, our daughter, could maybe have both parents, present. And that felt like a really good idea. So I went out with 2 suitcases and holding her hand basically, and it escalated. So I moved to America by accident. She was so much happier with both of us, obviously. I mean, that I just felt it was important to try and stay, as did they. And so we applied for a green card, and we got into a good school. And so I didn't go out there for work at all. I actually couldn't work for a couple of years because I didn't have a visa. But even in many regards, it was a great blessing, because I could hunker down, go to acting class, write. I'm also an artist, and I draw. And I had this amazing creative period of 2 years where I wasn't allowed to work, where I just actually did all the things that I loved doing. And America is quite different to here in terms of they will encourage anybody. Here, people would say to me, you're writing a play. Why on earth would you do that? And in LA, they go, oh, you're writing a play. Oh, that's great. What's it about? Oh my God, we've got to put it on. And although that's deeply irritating to a lot of Brits, this kind of endless enthusiasm, for somebody that hadn't felt particularly encouraged by either my peers or my environment, I just really enjoyed people saying, yeah, do it. And actually, that was just a blessing in disguise, because I had an art show every year, and I started writing plays and putting them on. I went to an incredible acting class, which has just been a complete saving grace as far as my confidence goes, because acting class is something where you're perpetually working on material, and you never get that period of losing your confidence. So when you kind of go into a job, you're not thinking about, am I confident or not? You're thinking about, what's the work? What's the part? How do I make this the best it can possibly be? Which I think when you have long periods out of work in the UK, it really impacts on your ability to kind of go into another job, because you're thinking, oh, Jesus, I've had 6 months, I haven't been working, can I still do it? Dusting off the cobwebs. But if you're actually in class and you're going, well, I've just been working on all this material that I love, and I've been working with other people, you don't have the self-doubt element of it gets erased. And actually which is so important. It's kind of, this is so exciting. How do I make this the best expression of my craft that I can, etc.
So much you've just said resonates with me. I also moved to America for 2 years. One of the things that struck me when I arrived was just the freedom I felt. I did things in America that I could have done in the UK, but I just would never have thought to have done it. And I was met with nothing but joy and respect and support. And, one thing about the UK, I love the UK, but we are really cynical individuals over here. And one thing I really noticed was that they just want to celebrate success. And without a shadow of a doubt, living in California changed my life for the better. And I still go over there regularly each year. And it has brought an element of joy to my craft that I didn't think would have been possible if I just stayed in the UK. So everything that you're saying really resonates with me on that level. So I'm glad that happened. Quite a thing to do, to go over and, suddenly make that decision with your 5-year-old, but what an incredible experience. Does your daughter, can she remember any of that time?
Oh, she remembers all of it. And yeah, it was a really important decision because her dad's show ran for 8 years and he and his now wife were the leads in that show. And had we not been there, she would not have seen him. And so the relationship that they have is entirely different. And that's something that is invaluable, I think. And she's really, really appreciative of the fact we all attempted to do that together. And she remembers it. We all remember it vividly. She's now spent, more of her life in the States than she has here. And I wish, there's part of me that wishes she'd come back to the UK, because however long I was there, I always felt the UK was home.
I felt the same. It's funny, isn't it? Because when we got there, I didn't even know I had a working visa. Not only that, I didn't even know how rare they were. So when I arrived, there was some post on the doormat and I picked it up and said, "What's this?" And my husband said, "Oh, that's your working visa." And I said, "Great," put it in my wallet, didn't think anything of it. And then I went to pick the kids up from their school and it was in San Francisco and there were lots of creative individuals at the school gate and they all worked for George Lucas or Pixar. Of course they did. And I remember them saying, "Do you know, my wife can't work. We've been here 15 years because she can't get a visa." And I went home to my husband that day and said, "If you think I'm just doing school pickup while we're here, I'm not." And then I went completely off on one and was very lucky to be supported in that. So yeah, it's so fascinating to hear that story. And I also felt that call back to the UK, which is really strange because the UK can be quite a harsh place, I think, to reside in. But I remember thinking I wanted to give the kids their identity, and they are, they're quarter Mauritian actually, so they've got all sorts in them. But we had a brilliant time in the school there. It was fantastic. It was really creative. And in the end, we decided to leave and come back. And I'm glad about that decision. But they still have really fond memories of America. And there's a part of them that will always love it. So really interesting to hear that story. Let's touch a little bit on your voice acting career. I would love to hear some of the work that you've done. Which bits of it have you enjoyed? Which bits of it have you perhaps not enjoyed?
I can't think of anything I haven't enjoyed doing.
Oh, I love it. You see, it's such a great thing to do.
Well, I was kind of doing voiceover work when it was booming. So, there was a point at which I was doing voiceovers for Boots and British Airways and Always Ultra, which was always my favorites, and Fiat Punto. And yeah, I got so much work for a period that it was basically sustaining me. It was just before I went to the States, actually. And I was doing radio dramas for the BBC. And then when I got to the States, it's an entirely different environment. You don't really none of my actor contemporaries were doing voiceover work. It's interesting. It's like an entirely different profession. I don't know if you...
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, I always say it's an additional skill set because people say, is voice acting acting? Well, of course it is. But the way that we teach it and train it, it's a completely different skill set that you won't get really at drama schools in the way that we coach. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is different.
I think also I used to be dealing with advertising agencies and you'd go into a voice recorder and you'd have 20 people sitting in front of you and you'd have execs and they'd be saying, "No, we want it this way, we want it this way." And actually, it's very much about being cool under pressure and using your voice in an entirely different way, really, particularly with advertising, because they're very, very specific about emphasis. And so it's very, very different to acting. You're almost often given line reads, which you have to take because somebody's paying you decent money to say things the way that they want to say them. It's even to the point of, somebody might ask you to pronounce something wrong. You still have to do it
Absolutely. I mean, it's so great to hear you say this, because we talk a lot about the fact that it is a separate skill set, but it can be learned and it can be taught. And I think what you've picked up on there, especially in the corporate and commercial world, you are expected to bring it. You know, you're not expected to learn on the job, really. And you have to be able to deal with sometimes very demanding clients. I love all that side of it. You know, people laugh at me because I love corporate narration. I love commercial because I came up through broadcast and I've worked in startups and, you know, been a self-starter in all those arenas. But I love the challenge of that. And I like dealing sometimes with difficult people, but I kind of like that. So yeah, it's interesting. Would you say it was a golden era, really, that time in terms of your voice work?
It was a golden era in advertising. And it was before they were using mainly names to do voiceovers. So I was lucky that I got so much work, and the residuals and the money in it was totally different than the money in it now. And then when I went to the States, it took a while. And then out of nowhere, I got asked to do a drama with great cast. It was Patrick J. Adams and Lawrence Fishburne and Stephen Webber. That was such fun to go back into the studio and do that. And it was called America 2.0, and it was a really good idea. And yeah, I'm still in touch with those guys because it went very well, and they're trying to develop it in various directions. But it was really, really nice to get back into a studio and do that. It was really fun to get back and do that work. Yeah.
That sounds incredible. That's the thing we all aim for, to get those moments where we can, you know, working in an ensemble is quite unusual now. We're all stuck in our studios alone. Doesn't mean to say it doesn't happen. Of course, we still have radio dramas, but, you know, the budgets and the opportunities for things like radio dramas are certainly smaller now than they were years ago. So can we still access that America 2.0? I'd love to hear it.
It's a podcast. I play the journalist who interviews Patrick J. Adams, who plays the president. So it's in the first episode. It's a really good idea. And I hadn't seen Patrick in Suits. I hadn't experienced Suits. So when I met him, we talked about the fact we both love theatre. And then he bought one of my paintings. It was very nice. And then years later, actually during COVID, I watched Suits, and I was so glad I hadn't, because I would have been like serious girl crushing on.
You'll have to send me the link. We'll make sure we put it up with the podcast, because I definitely think people will be interested to listen to that. I do want to move on to talking about Shakespeare's women. When we were first approached by your team, we knew instantly that Bravo wanted to support this work. You do so much work, Lorien, to highlight these issues that include domestic abuse, immigration, sexual assault, and in particular for us, highlighting women's voices that don't often get heard. What is it that compels you to write about stories like this?
It's all to do with the fact that I started working in the survivor space. In 2013, I was approached to write and produce a documentary about child abuse in Hollywood. And it was I can't remember how long we researched it, but it was a hefty research project. And then we were trying to find survivors, boys, actually, not women, girls, who'd experienced abuse within the system. So within the studio system, within the industry. And I worked with this amazing person who shared his story with me. And in that time, I was kind of trying to reconcile, I was working in LA, the fact that I'd been abused myself as a child. And I was doing a lot of work, a lot of therapy work to try and identify. I couldn't remember a lot of what had happened, to go back and I was very supported in that process. And what became very clear to me with my own story and with researching other people's stories was that survivors really don't have a voice or haven't had a voice. And a lot of the most painful things that people experience are never spoken. And it's not just women. It's both genders. But then when I worked further into the survivor space with women and started working with Refuge and started to identify survivor stories, what became really, really clear was that most people were frightened to speak. And so, and I think the world that we've moved into has become a world where the gatekeepers, who were essentially middle-class white men, have been told to bugger off. And so the people that haven't been heard, the indigenous communities, the people that have been sidelined, are beginning to be able to move into the center of the frame and to speak out and be heard in so many different arenas, which I think is long overdue. I don't think it's necessarily generating sexual equality, because until women and men are paid the same and treated the same on a governmental, economic, socioeconomic, political level, that is not going to happen. But it's all part of the same thing that so many people have been silenced for so long. And in terms of domestic abuse, it's slightly more complicated than that, because people don't speak for fear of recrimination. People don't speak because they are trapped. And people need to be supported to speak anonymously. So it's all a very, very sort of sensitive area. And during COVID, I did a piece with Sophie Linfield, who produced Shakespeare's Women, where I found stories of sexual violence throughout the world and wrote monologues, which then were put together in a piece called Punched, which was to generate awareness around the UN 16 days to stop violence against women and girls. And what I was trying to identify was the scale of the problem, the fact it's a global problem, that there are many, many forms of sexual violence. And during the pandemic, sexual violence doubled because women and girls were trapped in home environments, and boys. So I felt very passionate about trying to make that. It was a shadow pandemic, and nobody was talking about it. And Shakespeare's Women had started as a process years before then. I'd been wanting to find a way to write about his female characters, to give them a voice beyond their plays. So I felt very aware that a lot of the women in the plays don't survive them. The plays are called Othello, not Desdemona, and Lear, not Cordelia, and Macbeth, not Lady Macbeth. And I wanted to kind of reframe the narrative and go, well, what if the women were the main characters in those plays? And what if they survived their plays, and what would happen to them next? And then I became very aware that the women that I was looking at, most of Shakespeare's women are in situations of abuse, whether it's familial abuse or sexual abuse or domestic abuse. And it's so seismic, the fact that he, a man, was writing about this so many hundreds of years ago. And his observations are so acute and relevant in a contemporary context. And it made me feel very strongly that, lots has changed historically, of course, but some fundamental things have not changed. And what Shakespeare's writing about, from 1604, it is happening in 2024. And I felt that if I wrote a piece where I put Shakespeare's Women into a domestic abuse support group, and they were contemporary characters meeting and talking about their life experience, it would make that as clear as I could possibly make it, that the situation is the same.
And that's across the board with so many issues today as well. I feel like we've gone backwards a lot of the time. So all of that really resonated with us when we read the script. Tell us a bit about what the play is about, just if you can talk us through some of those themes a little bit more and what brought the play together.
What brought the play together was that I wrote a film first, where I selected the characters that I wanted to write about. The film is an interweaving of the last act of all of their plays. So Desdemona, Lady Macbeth, Cordelia, Viola, Kate from Taming of the Shrew, Gertrude. And so I put them all in a kind of East End melting pot in the film. And what I wanted to do was, by the end of the film, I wanted them all to walk into the same room. They know they're connected, but they're not really experiencing each other in the last act of their plays, which is the sum total of the film. And so by the end of it, I wanted them to be sitting down together in the same trauma recovery group, the same domestic abuse support group. The play was what happens from then, because I was like, okay, oh God, they're all sitting down in the same room. Now what happens? They're going to know each other. They're going to talk to each other. They're going to interrelate. Are they going to like each other? What are the dynamics between them? Then, so for example, the Gertrude Ophelia storyline became Ophelia pregnant with Hamlet's child, having lost her mind because she's witnessed Hamlet's death and her father's being killed, and Claudius and her brother's being killed. She's lost her mind and she's essentially homeless at this point. And Gertrude wants to take Hamlet's child away from her. And because Gertrude is a very powerful barrister and is representative of the law and representative actually of the law that works against women in this country and survivors, because legally, very, very hard to speak out what you have to go through as survivor, even if you're trying to deal with, it's so complex and the odds are so stacked against you. So that's one dynamic that I established in the play. The other is that Cordelia has lost Lear and is carrying him around in an urn because she can't let him go. And in the course of the play, you sort of come to understand that their connection and their relationship was perhaps too close. What was going on there. And then you've got Kate from Taming the Shrew, who's in a wheelchair after a car accident, and her carer is Petruchio, Peter. And so their dynamic becomes a very feisty, fiery dynamic where they're just screaming at each other all the time, but it's not as simple as Peter imposing himself on Kate, which is always a problem with the play. How do you resolve the problem of Taming the Shrew? So it's basically an exploration of the chosen characters and what would happen if they were alive now. And then also just to kind of put loads of new factors into the mix, really, of contemporary living, and maybe not making it as too simple either, because the women in the play are culpable. They're not innocents. They've lived. Desdemona's a drug dealer and Lady Macbeth's character is ex-police and she's got huge things on her conscience. So I never think it should be with these stories too simplistic. There's so many grey areas, and those are the areas that I think are most interesting. And most importantly, I wanted them to be funny. I wanted the experience to be, you put women in a domestic abuse support group and you think, oh my God, this is going to be too grim. And it can't be that. If you want people to engage with the material and understand the material and be interested in the material, you've got to generate three-dimensional characters who've got a lot going on, and mainly characters that have life and love and comedy. And it's a bit like, you throw these balloons in the air. If each character is a balloon, for example, they can't hit the ground.
That's something that really struck me about the play. We knew it was good. The themes were going to be important and hard hitting, but there was also a sense of relief. That's what the comedy does, right? And it enables you to kind of let your guard down and just enjoy the piece of work for what it is, I think. And I definitely came away from it wanting to explore those characters more. Yes, I did go back and start reading some of the plays again. Haven't finished them, of course, but it really made me want to pick up the plays again and reread them, thinking about the points of view. It hadn't even crossed my mind, if I'm honest, that all the years that I've read them, I hadn't really thought about it, which is ridiculous. So for me, it brought up lots of things that I wanted to go back and dig into it. Did the play reflect any of your own experiences when you were writing it?
To a point, yes. I mean, I wrote a play previous to this called Everything I Ever Wanted to Tell My Daughter About Men, which I then made into a film, which was 23 short films directed by 21 different women that we edited into one feature. And it's one woman's story, recovery story, really. It's vignettes from all the relationships that she's ever had in her search to find out why she makes really difficult choices, relationship choices. And what you come to realize over the course of the film is that she's been traumatized, and that the choices that she's made in her life all stem from the fact that she was abused as a child, and she was sexualized as a child, and she had no self-worth and was passive and frozen in many regards in relationship to men. And that was my experience. I mean, that's an autobiographical piece in many regards. Not every single detail, but the point that I was trying to make and explore was, if you have traumatic experiences in childhood, they do dictate the choices you make through your life. And it's very hard for women, I think. I don't think there's any real way of understanding that. We're never taught that. We're never explained that if you've had a non-consensual experience very early on, it makes consent a real issue for you, because you get frozen, in moments where you want to say no, And I'm being this specific about it because 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual violence. So this is incredibly common. This is not just me. And I felt in sharing my story, what I hoped was that other people would want to share theirs or at least feel that they weren't alone. And I wrote the piece for my daughter when she was 16. She didn't read it until she was 18 later, but it was very much also wanting to pass my experience on to a generation that can perhaps not make the same mistakes that we did, that there is more education around these things than there was for my generation.
And there's many more, just picking up on some of those points. I left home when I was very, very young and had a completely bonkers childhood in many ways. But there was never any talk of, there was never any space to talk about any of that, ever. It was just kind of whatever was going on and all the different experiences I'd had. Whereas fast forward to today, I do feel like there are perhaps slightly more spaces to talk about that. But it was just kind of, that's your life, you just get on with it. There was that approach, I think. I don't know if you found the same thing.
It just wasn't factored in. It just wasn't talked about. And although I tried to talk about it, it wasn't talked about, and I think when you're young and you try and talk about these things and it's as if they didn't happen, you don't even know where to begin. And I'm saying that because when I wrote Shakespeare's Women, it's informed by my own experiences, but it's not my own experience. I very, very much wanted to be true to the characters. And, the work I did was looking at the plays and really thinking about who these women would be now. And of course, and what I share with them is the fact that I'm a survivor and that I feel like it's very important to define survivors as fully dimensional women who have lives and kids and who function and who are funny and who can fall in love again. And because there's a real stigma still attached, but we use the word survivor, not victim anymore. There's still a stigma attached to it. And people feel very odd if you lead with it. And what we did during the film, which was interesting, was at the end of each day shoot, because the 23 directors all shot their films in a day, we asked the members of the crew, everyone on set, if they wanted to be part of a PSA that we did, which supported the film. And we gave people a choice to say, I'm a survivor, or I support survivors, or we had a whole list of things that they could say that we then edited. And what was utterly amazing about it was how many people on set, including the men, stood up at the end of the day and said, I'm a survivor. I mean, it was so moving. And what was interesting about it was that nobody made a fuss about it. Nobody necessarily even talked about it. It was about the fact, if you acknowledge in a space that 75% of people in the room are survivors, there's an immediate support. There's a safety net. People don't have to tell their stories. You're not compelled to do or say anything. But the admission of it creates safety for people. And that is what isn't around. That is not what is around in our social framework, I don't think.
Yeah, I would agree as well. It's a complicated space. And I just think something as simple as acknowledging it, I think that's the thing I take away from my childhood, is that people did not acknowledge these things ever. And also this idea that we're all wounded individuals, which we clearly are, but we're broken. Actually, a lot of the women and men that I know that have experienced abuse in some form are very, very strong individuals. And often people would go, gosh, I wouldn't have never have thought that. Well, yeah, there's so much more to talk about that. And that's what I really enjoyed about what the play brought up for us. Let's move on and talk a little bit about what it was like working with Jude Kelly. Can you tell us how that collaboration came about?
Oh, I love Jude so much. Jude was introduced to me by a friend of mine, Paul Cruz, who ran the Wallace Annenberg in LA, who was the artistic director there. And we became friends when he was producing a play that Saffron Burrows did at Wallace. And I know Saf, we've known each other a long time. And so when I was looking for somebody to direct the punched piece at the Criterion, the survivors' stories, Paul suggested that I get hold of Jude. And I sort of read about her and thought, oh, holy God, this woman's impressive. She's never, ever going to want to, why would she want to do this? Oh my God, And to my shock, she said she'd direct it. And she came on board at the last minute, and she has this incredible ability to democratize a room. She just treats everyone the same. She gets down, she does the work, she prioritizes what's important in the material that you're doing. She has the laser sharp focus. She's incredibly quick. And she just creates something out of, it feels like it's been created out of thin air in a way. It's that magic. It's like watching somebody pluck things and you're just like, wow, how do you? But she's incredibly inspiring. Her value system is so sound. The way that she feels about women, the way that she feels about the whole environment she's created around the WOW Festival, support for women and girls. And she's incredibly positive. I've never worked with anybody like her. And so when Shakespeare's Women got the space, when we got the space at the Globe, I just went to her first. She had first refusal on it right from the get-go, because I would always choose to work with her. And it's an honor to work with her. And I feel that people left the space feeling the same. She's an extraordinary force.
I loved how she certainly connected with the audience when she came on and talked about working with that particular production, and just everything she said just felt like she was talking directly to me. She had that very quick ability to connect, and certainly that's what I took away from that production. So any future plans for the work? We're crossing our fingers here at Brava for an audio drama, but where are you going to take it?
Well, we would do an audio drama. We just need the money to do it, to pay everybody. I've got a recording of it actually that the Globe did. So I need to watch that. I've only just got a copy of that. I didn't know necessarily when we went into the rehearsal space that it would come off the page like it did. I really was not expecting it to. It was really magical to see a piece of work that's existed in my head that I know reads well on the page. I feel it does read well on the page, but that's a completely different experience to actually having it read in a room. And I felt, God, it could have fallen flat and bits of it could have really dragged. And, what was I going to have to cut? And were some characters going to work? And so it was, all those things were questions going into the rehearsal process. And I was just amazed really at how it did work and it did lift off the page. And it really was as funny as I hoped it was going to be. You just don't know, because all this is going on in your own head as a writer, and you're literally thinking, I'm losing my mind most of the time. So I think for us, it was proof of concept. It was, this piece really, really works on so many different levels. It's very funny, but it also, particularly in the second reading that we did in the evening, where people had really settled in a little, I felt that the emotional beats started to land, and it felt very moving as well. So it's kind of made me determined to find a way of getting a run for it. And that means we have to find either an independent producer, a bigger production house that will produce it with us, or we find the financing to produce it. The great news is that Refuge want to endorse it. They were really happy with how it went, but also the fact they felt it wasn't too heavy. They felt it brings the issues into a space almost incidentally, in a way that people that aren't survivors can access. So in that sense, it really worked for them, because it means it broadens the net. And so what would be lovely would be to find a backer who is excited about supporting Refuge as we are. And then what we would love to do with them is find a way of any production of the piece always having a donation option, so that wherever it is and whatever happens with it, it goes back. There's a direct connection back to Refuge, because, well, they and Women's Aid are the largest support networks in the UK, and they need all the support they can get. I mean, they're frontlining it. They're not fanning around doing art pieces. They don't have the time to do that. That's what I'm there for. That's what you're there for. They're literally dealing with women and political shifts, and there's so much media shifting that goes on that they then have to manage in terms of triggers and their helpline, and there's a lot that goes on frontline wise. We just have no idea, I think, how much work they have to do on a day-to-day basis. So Yeah, I think we just need some very kind person to come forward with a bit of a wad of cash so that we can get this amazing group of people back together, because everybody would love to do it again. Tamsin Greig was staggeringly good.
To be fair, I felt like it was a masterclass in acting, and it was. Obviously we brought a whole Bravo crew up with us, and we got there despite all the trains being cancelled. That's another story, but we made it. And I just remember coming out of it thinking, God, everyone was fantastic, but Tamsin, I just believed every single thing she said. I just was completely in the story. I was mesmerised by her performance. And so in terms of proof of concept, then the whole play was fully booked. It was a sellout. There was a standing ovation, which I recorded at the end.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, well, I'll send it to you because I got it.
I'm too nervous.
We'll be behind you every step of the way, and any way we can support you, we will continue to do so. How important is it that, Bravo's small, we're a tiny organisation, tiny but mighty, I like to think. But how important is it that organisations like us support the work that you do?
Well, it is important. But you were the only people that stepped up. Let's be clear about that. So your support was hugely, hugely valuable. And we had worked for months and months to try and find sponsors for the piece. And you were the only group that stepped up to support us. So we greatly, greatly appreciate that. It really is all about coming together, activism. There's a lot going on. And I think it's very hard to single out what you want to be active about. It's endless, whether it's conflict or whether it's climate or whether it's, it's very, very, people get totally lost in where to start. So I think often it is a question of sort of choosing your lane and then going, I know I can do good in this area because at least I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. And I think you have to be able to speak truth to power to a degree. I think it's really important for men and male collaboratives to step up and support these kind of survivor. What would happen if the FA, for example, actually said, look, we'll support a production like this, because they know that domestic abuse figures double during tournaments in the UK. And it's been front page news. If the FA started to put some welly behind counteracting what happens during the European Cup, whatever, how amazing would that be? I think anybody that really affiliates with this subject is just doing a really good thing. And in the world that we're in with our kids, what's been interesting is talking to fathers about their daughters and mothers about their sons, because it's not just, gender to gender. Mothers struggle with, what do I speak to my sons about in relationship to pornography and consent? And fathers are saying, how do I protect my daughter as she's going into her teens? It really is a universal issue. And people do want answers. And I think what the hope with the play, and I think I felt this when we did the Q&A, is that it's about starting the discussion. You have to keep having the discussion. And Jude, is brilliant at this. You don't have the discussion once and it goes away. It's ongoing. It's like gender equality is ongoing. People just sit on their laurels and think, oh, we've done quite a lot, or we did this, or, oh, this is passed through Parliament, or, no, it's a lifelong thing. And we all have to fight the good fight as part of our lives, as just part of our everyday lives.
And that's the thing that drew us to you. And when your team approached us and we looked at you, and we just knew that it was something that we wanted to support. And it's very clear that this is a lifelong thing that you have supported. It's not just a kind of one-off, one conversation like you're saying. So, we will always be behind you. We will dig into our business cards and see who we know in the FA and see what can happen. We have got to wrap up soon. It's been so interesting talking to you, and I could carry on for another 2 hours. So we'll do that in the pub at some point, hopefully. Talk to us about how much you raised for Refuge. And if you're still taking donations, please tell us how people can continue to support it.
Yes. Well, we did actually, funnily enough, just found out this morning. So we made $8,000 for Refuge, which is pretty much all of the ticket sales. We paid the Globe for the space. And what was amazing was that we ended up doing the 2 shows, which is very much thanks to the actors. We wanted the afternoon show to be free for schools and survivors, but because of the time of year, we couldn't get people in. So we ended up putting the tickets on sale. It was a bit of an accident. But because of that accident, we ended up making much more money than we thought we'd make. So 8K is really, really great. And I was going to announce that today and write to everybody and say, thank you. We've raised this amount of money. It does make a huge difference. And it's made me realize as well that the play can make money and that money can be of service. So that's a really, really powerful realization as well. But we're so grateful to you because you stood up and supported us. And it makes a huge difference that we were able to actually get, the money that you donated to us enabled us to get some support to do the production that we just wouldn't otherwise have had. And Sophie and I have done all of this for nothing. It's an act of love. And as did all the cast, Jude, nobody was paid. Nobody was paid a bean. So it was a really incredible example of people coming together for a really good reason. And I could not believe that the cast gave up, 4 days of their time to do all of this. So it was remarkable, really.
Well, it was a real privilege. Lorien, thank you so much for joining us. Please come back and talk to us again soon about any developments with the play. But for today, thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you. Take care.
You've been listening to High Notes, a podcast on the art and business of voice. Thanks for joining us on this episode of High Notes. Check out the episode description below for more information. And to find out more about our work at Brava and get info and tips, subscribe to our newsletter. The link is also below. Join us next time for more insights into the world of voice.